Hello, friends. Here we are. It is another episode of Big Talk with LGOtv. Still trying to come up with a better name. Maybe that one will stick. Who knows?
I like it.
You like it? Cool. Our guest today likes it. So, she is an award-winning author. So if she likes it, she knows words. So I think that's good. So let me tell you about our guest today. Our guest today is my friend, Tameka Fryer Brown, who I knew as Tameka Fryer. I am Laura Gassner Otting, and she knew me as Laura Gassner.
Absolutely.
Why? Because we are pioneers. 1988, North Miami Senior High. Go Pioneers! Okay, so before she was an award-winning picture book author, before she wrote books named Around Our Way on Neighbor's Day and My Cold Plum Lemon Pie Bluesy, which, by the way, was lauded as a Charlotte, I can't even say it, Zolotow? Charlotte Zolotow Honor Book, a Bank Street College Best Book, and a CCBC College Choices Best Book, an Abilene ISD Mockingbird Award nominee, an SIBA Book Award nominee, a Star of the North Picture Book Award nominee, and one of the New York Public Library's 100 titles for reading and sharing. The New York Public Library.
Yes, New York would be good to me.
Nice. And before that, before she also wrote her most recent book, Brown Baby Lullaby, which also got a star review from Kirkus, and I have to say was chosen as Amazon's best book of the year. Okay, that's pretty impressive. But before all these things, and before the book that she's writing right now, 12 Dinging Doorbells, which will be her fourth, which will be out in 2022. She was,
oh my gosh,
this girl right here. She was a North Miami Senior High pioneer. That is her. And here's the thing. I dug out our high school yearbook.
Yeah.
Here she is. This is like a close-up. I will give you a close-up. There she is, right next to Jane Espinoza. Yes. And Francis Galarraga. And just to be clear, there I am there on the bottom. Right. So here we are. This is us. We were pioneers. And I will say, I always like to say that if you were the smartest person in the room that you were in the wrong room. And today I'm not the smartest person, and I can actually prove it because that first photo I showed you was the top 50 graduating members of our class of 654, and Tameka graduated number 10. I graduated number 29. So Tameka, I can honestly say I got the receipts. I am in the room here today. How are you doing?
Don't put that pressure on me. I'm not No.
So you graduated from our esteemed high school that sent like 12 people to college, and you went to FAMU and you came out planning to sell medical supplies. Sure. Okay. Sounds great. How'd you get from there to becoming a children's book author?
Well, as you can imagine, it was a journey. I did actually sell medical supplies for about 5 years. And then I got married and I had a baby. And when my baby was about 8 months old, my supervisor, and because I was a sales mentor, really, and I was covering the eastern half of the country, and I was going out on the road mentoring other sales reps. And my supervisor said, well, we need you out on the road 4 nights a week. And I had an 8-month-old baby. And so I said, you might need that, but I'm not going to do that. So I left the workforce and became a stay-at-home mom. And then that one baby turned into 2 babies and turned into 3 babies. And then, of course, I reached that point that a lot of stay-at-home moms reach, where I love the privilege of being able to stay at home with them, but I needed something more. I needed something that was me focused, where I could use that brain that you talked about, in a more cerebral way. And so I had a couple failed starts. My husband, he, brought me a couple businesses in a box. I don't know if you remember SMC that used to come on like 3:00 in the morning, and, you could sell trinkets and little knickknacks and things like that. So he said, I think you should do this.
Sure. Okay.
Maybe I can. I got a business degree.
What were the trinkets?
Oh my gosh, like little figurines, giraffes and people and angels and just vases and just anything.
Did you have a lot of them? Did you love them? Like, would you have one of those houses full of like all those freaky things that like the eyes follow you when you walk around in the middle of the night?
I didn't until I sold S&P. And now I have some remnants around here, which I don't have a lot of them. And I picture frames. I'm looking around my living room here. I have some of the things left, but no, I did not love that, which was the issue, right?
Yeah, that's the issue.
That's the issue. And the other business in a box was paraphernalia where you could have custom printed like pens and mugs and things of that nature. I didn't love that either. So
you're away from home, like 4 nights a week, away from your babies, selling things that you don't really care about.
Well, I know I was home at that point. I had left.
Okay. Sorry. So this job was so that you didn't have to travel.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I could have my own business. I could, because I was seeking something to do outside of mommyhood.
Yeah.
And so, those were the failed attempts, because I did not love them. That was not my passion. And so once I just kind of put that stuff to the side and say, okay, this is not for me.
Yeah.
Then I was able to really dig in, for myself and figure out, what is it, Tameka, that you want to do? What's your goal in the first place? And so I figured out that my goal was to do something that was going to be a legacy not only for my family, but really I had grandiose ideas for the world, right? But what was that going to be? And I just happened to be reading a book to my youngest daughter one day, picture books, which I love personally as an art form.
Yeah.
And it was just an epiphany. I was like, I can do this.
Well, English what was
my best subject. Huh?
What was the book?
The first book the book that I was reading,
the one that you were reading that like gave you this epiphany. I mean, like, I feel like, forget the Bible. Like, we should maybe it's blasphemy, but we should all be reading this book.
No, it was a picture book, and to be honest, Laura, I don't remember what it was, because it really wasn't about. Yeah, it wasn't about the book. It was about the fact that I loved the art form of picture books. It was something that I enjoyed. And I just automatically tied to the fact that I was good at writing. And I don't even know what made me recognize in that moment that this was a path that I should pursue.
Yeah.
But I did.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful that it just kind of hit me out of the blue, because it excited me in a way that selling picture frames and, figurines did not.
Now, had you been writing on the side, or had you been doing, had you been somebody who liked to draw, who liked to express themselves through pictures? Like, was there a pattern that you could recognize when this lightning bolt hit?
I do like to sketch. I think I'm a copier. I don't do as well just coming up with things out of the blue, but I like to sketch things that I see. So that is an artistic tie, which made me love, I guess, the illustration part of the picture book. I was good at writing. I wasn't really a journaler or wrote poetry on the side just for fun, but it was something that I knew I was good at.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went back through this, this little yearbook, and I noticed some really interesting things, which were that you sang, that you were in chorus. I won't show that picture of everybody at those dresses. And that also that you were in the National Spanish Honor Society, and that you were also in the math club. And here's what I think is really interesting about those three things. I think there was rhythm, right, which go into children's books. There's math, right? So there's like cadence, A B A B A A B, like how you write the way that that poetry sort of comes into existence. And I think obviously there's a lot of poetry in children's books. And then Spanish, right? So this like the words, the language, sort of turning sounds over. And I think there's a really interesting pattern that these were your 3 extracurricular activities. And then the 4th was it was the Students Against Drunk Driving. So there's like a, care, right? So I think there's this sort of really interesting pattern that when I went back and I was like, oh, I got to find some photos and we got to talk about old school days. I found a really interesting pattern there that I wonder if that makes any sense or rings true at all for you.
It makes absolute sense. And I don't even have my yearbook anymore, but I never would have thought of that. You're absolutely right. So you've enlightened me in a way as to how I got here. And maybe this was inevitable all the time.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I have a friend who once said to me that what sets me apart in my executive coaching practice, or when I coach people from stage, is that I recognize patterns in people. And I didn't really understand what he meant until this morning when I was looking through the yearbook and I was like, oh. So I don't know. I could be totally wrong.
That's pretty amazing, actually.
I thought it was kind of fascinating. And, I do think, as with the work that I do with Limitless, I do think that we're told so early in life that careers have to look a certain way. Like, I didn't know that children's book author was a job when I was growing up, even though we had children's books.
Me either.
How they came apart? Came about. I had no idea, but we somehow along the way, we were not taught that was an option.
Is that a Miami thing? Because I don't know, because there are a lot of my peers who say, that they were young and they knew they wanted to be writers or whatever. And I'm like, I never considered that was actual job. I mean, I knew that books were written, but I didn't consider that they were written by people, as in careers, Wow.
Isn't that an amazing?
You're the only other person that has actually ever expressed that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I joke around sometimes that our high school, they mostly just wanted to try to get everybody out without getting shot or pregnant. So I feel like, they
didn't have to worry about me.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even kiss a boy until I went to college. So no concerns on that front. But I definitely, I think that when we were growing up, right, we graduated in 1988. Sorry, I'm aging you.
No, hey.
Every time somebody says to me, oh, wow, it's your birthday, you don't look a day over 29. I'm like, that's actually offensive. Like, I'm glad I look what I look like. I'm glad I have the scars I have. I'm glad I have the life that I have. Like, I earned this. I earned all of this. I'm happy to be here. So in 1988, we were basically taught, be a doctor, be a nurse, be a teacher, be an accountant, right? Like, be a salesperson. Like, they were just specific jobs. And those were the jobs that you went for. And I think, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, that kids today, maybe they won't go through the same sort of midlife shift that we went through, because they have such a wide open world, and they can see not just we played video games, but they actually watch YouTube channels where the video game designers talk about how they're designing the video games. I didn't know.
Absolutely.
Again, it was like children's book dropped into our laps, video games dropped into our laps. I had no idea. The beer that I went to go buy with, my fake ID at that 7-Eleven on West Dixie Highway, I didn't know people brewed that beer. I didn't know, I just it didn't occur to me. So I don't know, maybe it is a Miami thing, but I think maybe it's just a sign of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I don't know, but I'm glad for whatever reason that there's a shift. I'm glad that my children are thinking about self-actualization and, what's going to make them happy and how they're going to be able to make a difference in a way that I didn't. And I guess you didn't either, coming out of high school and college. So,
yeah, I definitely didn't. And, I have interviewed thousands of people across my career, all of whom are like, yeah, I thought I was going to be doing this. And then one day something happened
Yeah.
There was a parent, a teacher, a mentor, a diagnosis, a world tragedy, a children's book, reading. And all of a sudden I was like, actually, I should be going that way instead. Okay, so you decide you're going to do this. So then, of course, you write and produce award-winning books. Easy.
Not easy.
Not easy. Right. So
I thought it was going to be easy. I had that kind of faith in myself, but no, I had some learning to do. There was a learning curve. I did, however, the next day, once I had my epiphany, sat down and I wrote what I thought was the world's best children's book. And I sent it out to all of the top publishers in New York. And I sat back and just assumed that there was going to be a bidding war over this story that I had written.
Of course.
And there was not. I got rejections from all of them, but fortunately, one of them had a photocopied rejection letter, which said, "Hey, if you're really serious about writing for children, join the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, otherwise known as SCBWI." And so I was serious, and so I joined it, and that's when my career really started. That's when I started learning how to write. I knew I was a good writer, but how to write children's books is a totally different animal. And so I started learning the craft of writing for children.
And are you learning the craft of writing for children at the same time as learning the craft of selling children's books? Like, these are the things that children's books needs in order for them to make sense, for them to be educational, for them to be interesting, for them to be whatever it is they need to, compelling, and for kids to like them the way that whatever moment in time you're hitting, if the book's for a child who's 4 to 6, their brains work this way, or 7 to 9, their brains work this way. And at the same time, are you also learning, oh, and by the way, here's what makes people want to pick them off the shelf. Here's what makes them marketable. Because, you and I both know, when Robin Roberts tweeted out about Limitless, I picked up my 15-year-old that day at school, and he was like, "So Mom, that's kind of a big deal, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's kind of a huge deal." And he says to me, people have written better books than you, right? I think what he was trying to tell me was like, look, people have written way better books than you, and they've worked much harder, and they're not getting this much attention. So savor the moment. But like, you could write the best book in the world, but if you're also not paying attention to the marketing side of it, it doesn't matter. So when you were learning in this society, in this program that taking this shift seriously, did you learn both, or did they start with one and then go to the other? How did they handle both sides of this?
Well, it's self-education, right? And so I think what most writers do, and likely what I did, was to focus on the craft piece first. Focus on writing something that was sellable. And when you're talking about, for the traditional publishing model, your first hurdle is to sell it to the publishing house, to get an editor interested in it. So that is what you're trying to do, and that kind of is intertwined with writing a good book, if you will. So that's the first thing. You want to write something that's going to be marketable, as far as getting a publisher to buy it. So that's kind of what all the energies are focused on until you get published. And then your energy starts, you start focusing on, okay, so how do I help advance the sales of this book in the marketplace? And most of us, and I think back in the day, probably before I really entered the industry, publishing did a lot of that for you.
Yes.
Like, they put a whole lot more money behind the books that they invested in.
Yeah, that doesn't happen now at all.
No, not at all. There are a lot, for some people it does, but for a few. Not for the many. And so then you've got to figure out, okay, what can I do with my limited resources? Thank God for social media, because you can do so much as far as marketing your book via social media. But so that piece is kind of a learn as you go.
Yes.
But the more you focus on actually learning, what to do and what not to do.
Yes.
Your book is going to become more successful. So I think it's a lifelong education. Of course, I'm still learning.
Yes.
And I'm still, picking up tips and stuff.
Yeah. I have had a fraught relationship with Facebook and social media for years. I mean, it's not exactly the greatest company on earth, and yet it is our platform, right? I mean, I could get on my high horse and ride out of town and say, you know, screw you, I'm not going to, you know, become part of your algorithm, but then I'm basically muzzling myself and my ideas. So it's been, you know, yes, thank God for social media. And also, oh gosh, it's really, it's difficult. So, okay. So you write the first book, and, and these letters that you just sent cold letters. Like, were there any warm introductions? They were just like completely cold letters that you were sending.
That's the process. Back then, there was this thing called the slush pile. It's much smaller. Most houses now don't accept unsolicited submissions, which are submissions with directly from the author.
Yes.
You got to have an agent now.
Yes.
But yeah, that was a process. You just send, and your work goes into the slush pile, and you hope that they get to it and they like it. And that was just the process. I much rather like the process now. You know, my agent handles all that. So I create.
Where along the process, because, you know, it's sort of like with speaking, you know, like you give enough speeches, you show up on TV, you sell enough books, and suddenly the speakers bureaus call you. Mm-hmm. Did an agent call you at a certain point, or once you were in a publishing house, what were the steps there? Did you have to find the agent to find the publishing? Like, how did that all work?
Okay. All right. So here's how it went for me. I was doing the submission thing to the editors, and I was not selling my work. And I was at a point where I said, okay, well, maybe this is not my life's calling. Maybe I need to find something else, much like the SMC deal. Mm-hmm. But I was passionate about this. But so I got to the point where I said, well, maybe I need to make a change, but I'm going to try this one last thing. I am going to try to get an agent, because I wasn't sure if I wanted to give up that 15%, you know. Yes. But I saw the way the industry was going. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to try. And if I don't get an agent, then I'm going to try to do something else. And so I submitted to an agent, which can be as difficult as submitting to an editor, quite frankly. And she liked my work. Mm-hmm. And we had a conversation. We agreed to partner. She was my agent for 8 years. And so she sold 2 books. I sold 2 books with her. And so agents allow you, and it's really that way today, they allow you access to publishers that don't accept manuscripts just from the regular, you know, public. Yeah. Because they get so many, they've got to have a screening process. And so the agents are the screeners. So yeah, that's how I actually ended up getting an agent. And now I'm on my second agent.
So I love that. So, and as the agent, does the agent work with you and say, yeah, Tameka, I think you think this is a great idea, but really it's not so good, or you've already got 6 of those books out there? I mean, are they guiding your career, or are they just out there sort of shopping you and seeing, you know, if they can find a match?
The best agents are the ones that are guiding your career. Yeah. And they have different levels of editorial engagement. My agent that I have now she'll definitely tell me whether she thinks something is ready for submission, whether it will sell in this marketplace. Yes, we have those strategy conversations. My first agent was a lot more editorial. I had to go through so much more to get my manuscript from her desk to a publisher or to an editor. And that worked when I was new. Yes. And kind of didn't know myself and my own voice. But now this works much better for me, the relationship that I have with my current editor. And I think I ended up with her because I know myself more.
So Brown Baby Lullaby, was that with the new?
Yes.
Editor? Yeah.
Brown Baby Lullaby, 12 Dinging Doorbells. I have another book that we've signed a contract for, which hasn't been publicly announced. So I won't announce it yet. But I've and this has all been within 2-3 years with her. And I was for 8 years with the first one, and I sold 2 books right away. And then we had this big lull where I didn't sell everything because it was just a constant struggle.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think that's fascinating. I think that there are people who we find along the way, like you're getting on the highway and she's in the middle lane and she looks like she's going pretty fast because you're like just getting on the on-ramp, right? So you're like good in the slow lane and then you're catching up and then you're sort of next to her in the middle lane and then you want to get to the fast lane, but she's really good at the middle lane. And when you go to the fast lane, yeah, right. So then when you're there, suddenly you no longer match and she's not additive to what you're doing. And in fact, may be holding you back from finding your true voice. So you did mention that, you found your voice. So I think that's a really interesting concept in writing, in expression, but also just in that sort of mid-career shift, right? Like, how do you know when you found your voice?
Well, when I said I found my voice in that instance, I was talking about as a woman, as a human being. I knew what I wanted, where I wanted my career to go, what I wanted my focus as an author to be. And so finding my voice was like finding myself and my direction. And I think that just comes from being honest with yourself and being afraid to, as you say often, just shut out other people's expectations and really focus on what it is that you yourself want out of life, out of your career, out of everything. And so I was definitely at that place in my life. I was 40-ish. I had had my 40th birthday, maybe a couple years before. And I was just really at that point where, I want what I want, and I don't want other people's perceptions of what I should want to supersede my own.
Yes.
And so that was the voice that I found, and I heeded it.
So I often call those the FU 40s.
That's right.
I wish I had the FU 30s or maybe even the FU 20s, because I probably would have had a much better 30s. So you decide that you found your voice as a woman, as a human. You decide you're going to do this. You turn to your friends, you turn to your husband, you tell them this. Are they like, do what now? What? Or were they like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense. How can we support you? Like, what was the reaction?
Do you mean as far as leaving, not being with my first agent or something?
Yeah.
Well, actually, I didn't have the courage to break it off. I mean, I would talk to my husband and my children, and they were like, you just need to leave that agent. You just need to whatever. And I was like, but my career, but my whatever. But then we started really having, my agent and I, these discussions where I'm like, no. And, I started kind of standing up to her. I mean, Laura, I was older than her. I'm like, how are you kind of controlling what I do? And so we started having these kind of kind and civil, I think, battles. And so she went on maternity leave.
Oh, and when good opportunity.
When she came back, she was like, I'm trying to lower my client load and blah, blah, blah. And so unfortunately, I think that you're one of the clients that I'm going to have to let go. And I was like, oh, okay. So my voice, and I think kind of initiating some of those battles kind of led to her doing what I should have done, but I didn't do. But I was thankful that it happened.
You broke up with your hairdresser because she moved to a different salon.
Pardon me?
You broke up with your hairdresser because she moved to a different salon. Everyone's afraid to do that.
And so when I took about 3 weeks to just be thankful that it happened.
You weren't like, wait, you're breaking up with me? I was going to break up with you. You got it. It was like a gift from the start.
I really said to myself, this is what you should have done, a few years ago, but you didn't. And so God just said, okay, I'm gonna do it for you. And so I was like thankful, but I took 3 weeks just to like chill. And then I said, okay, I'm going to know what I want in an agent this time. And I was a lot more judicious about who I sent queries to.
Plus, you had a track
And
record.
And I think I sent them to about 3 people. And the very next day, my current agent, Marietta Zacher, contacted me and said, I was so happy to receive this. I'm a big fan of your work. Let's talk.
How wonderful to get that message.
Yep. Yeah. It was amazing. Yes, it was clear. And I think that the universe works like that sometimes, and I was not gonna, hem and haw. I knew that this was meant for me, and I went for it. And it's been wonderful. She is everything that I didn't know I needed in an agent at first.
Yeah.
She's a partner. She's a therapist. she's all of it. And we just have a wonderful relationship. I'm so thankful for her.
It's amazing, isn't it? How sometimes you don't even realize you're thirsty till someone hands you a glass of water. And you're like, I had no idea that I've been wandering around the desert for all this time. And suddenly it's like, oh, now it all makes sense. Now I get it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
that's incredible. So your books are they are so well received. They are read by families and children's everywhere, families and children everywhere, but they also feature Black families.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that there are plenty of Black children's authors who have had to feature white families because that's, marketing and, what the publishing houses were selling. And we're in this moment, I think, where you've been doing this for a long time, but a long time, your whole new career, right? But you've been doing it from the start. But there's also this moment in time now where we're talking about decolonizing our bookshelves. Ibram Kendi has How to Be an Anti-Racist Baby book out. But there's also, I think there's a subtle thing about representation, right? So like if you're reading a book and you see like daddy's a doctor and he goes to work and daddy's a white guy and, daddy's, a garbage man and he goes to work and he's a Black guy, right? Like that starts creating biases and racism in our mind. So your books are, what I love about them, they are so every time anybody I know has a baby, I send them a group of like 10 baby books, like my favorite books from growing up. And they're, things like Caps for Sale and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. But I've been including yours in the last, 6 months since I knew about it. And what I love about it is that it's like, here's a normal family doing normal things. And it's not like, here's a Black family, let's talk about the Black family. It's like, it's just representation as opposed to agenda, even though the fact that it exists is agenda in of itself. So I sort of love the like subtle, I love the subtle act of revolution of it, but I also love the beauty of the story of this like loving family who just loves each other and they go about their day.
Yes, absolutely. There is a universal story, or a book can have a universal story and be a source of representation at the same time. There's a lot to unpack to what you just said, though.
Yes, there wasn't a question in there. I wanted to throw it out as a topic.
yeah, it was a lot to unpack. First, the thing that you said was like, you think that, probably at some point in the past, a lot of Black people had to write, white characters to sell their book. That's actually not what ever happened.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, what happens is that Black voices are just shut out of the industry.
So they're not writing anything.
Well, they're not allowed to, they're by and large are not really allowed to write stories about white culture. Or
right.
white
I mean, I guess
people.
they're writing. Nobody's buying them. Right.
Yeah. But my point is, publishing is 80% white.
Yes.
All gatekeepers, including the authors, right? And so the flip actually happens is that you have, and there's still the case today, that the majority of stories that feature, children's stories that feature Black characters are written by white people through a white lens.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, obviously that's problematic because it doesn't allow for us to control our own narrative and share our stories in our way with children from our perspective. And so, so actually the converse has been, this historical truth about children's publishing. As you say, this is a moment in time where we're challenging that as artists, and hopefully finally as a country, as the book buying public. And that is really, publishing is a business. And so this is the type of thing that's going to change, that's going to come from the ground up. Like what you're doing when you're sending, your book bundle to expectant families. You are including, you being intentional about diversifying the types of books that you send. That's really important, because what that will do, if everybody does that in mass and focuses on it, it will drive up demand and sales for books for Black people, from other people of color, for Indigenous peoples. And then publishing will say, there's a market for this. Yes. And we will buy more of them. It's also really important to not just look at the cover of a book and say, okay, it's got a brown face on it, that's a diverse title. It might not be. It might be a title, again, from the white normative lens about another culture, but it's not the authentic story of that culture and what they want to share with everybody about their culture. So, take the extra step to make sure that the book creator, the author, was a person, an own voices author, as we call them, for that particular book.
Yeah, and and I have to say, as I'm saying, I send out this book bundle and I learned about yours and now I include yours. I'm embarrassed by that statement, because it's like the ultimate in laziness. Like, I just happened to know you because we went to high school together. I did no work. I did no research. And the fact that I send it as like, oh, I've included this representation is also kind of BS, because it's not like you speak for like every Black person out there, right? It's not like your experience and the stories that you tell. Like, we all come from storytelling cultures because we all were on Earth before there was, paper and writing and record. So we all come from storytelling cultures. And I'm Jewish. I would not assume that just because somebody was Jewish, you wrote a book about a Jewish family, that represents my experience, just in the same way that yours doesn't represent every Black family out there. And then I also think, well, I'm also not including this community and that community and that community. So for where if somebody is trying to diversify the inputs, are there certain authors that you look to? Are there certain book lists? Are there certain, like one of your books, I read in the bio, you had a Kirkus starred review for it, which is amazing. Are there places to go where it's like, these are great lists, these are great curators of different types of voices that we want to see more of, so that we can start, buying and, creating the spending power that you talked about behind them?
Absolutely. One initiative that I am personally a part of is called The Brown Bookshelf. And the website is thebrownbookshelf.com. And our focus is on bringing attention to all of the Black book creators that are creating books for children. So that is one resource. There's another organization called We Need Diverse Books. And it's just like their title sounds, and they focus on kid lit as well. On each of those sites, you can find other sites. And on those sites, you can find other sites. You know what I'm saying? Right. So the internet is replete with, you can even just type in diverse, or own voices, children's books, diverse book lists. The Google, has all of that there. It just does take intentionality.
Yes. I hear that phrase "own voices," and that's one that I haven't heard before. And there's so much talk today about, like, if you're trying to unlearn and you're trying to educate yourself, who do you go to? Should you read this author or that author? And should you read White Fragility or should you not because she's a white lady? Like all these big questions that are out there, and who is allowed to have voices and who should have voices and who's earned the right to have voices and all of these questions. I love these two great resources. We're going to put them in the show notes so that people can find them as well. Who are your personal favorite authors to read? Your kidlit authors. And then again,
yeah, kidlit authors. And before I say who my favorite authors are, or answer that question, let me answer the other thing that you just brought up. When it comes to trying to further your knowledge about anti-racism, like in this moment, I don't think there has to be a choice whether or not you read Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility or Ibram's, Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Read them both.
Yes.
I think Robin personally, and it might not, like I said, I don't speak for everybody, but personally, I think there's value in reading as a white person, reading a book from a white person, about this topic. I think there's value in that. There's definitely value in reading about the topic from the, Black perspective.
Yes.
Why not read both?
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that.
Well, I mean, I wasn't sure if you wanted to go there, so I didn't want to push you into that and make you have a statement about Robin DiAngelo. But since we're talking, let's keep pushing on this because this is very interesting to me. I listened to Brene Brown's interview with Ibram Kendi, and they talked a lot about how shame is not a tool of social justice, and it is so difficult right now to, like, we're in this culture where it's like, work hard, educate yourself, do the work. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong things. It's going to be awkward, but do it anyway. And also cancel culture is like off the rails, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, oh, what do we do? And I have friends that are like, I'm just going to plow ahead. I have friends that are like, I'm just going to, run for cover and duck and, let it pass. And this idea that there's a right book or a wrong book and that some random person on Facebook is going to tell you what the right one or the wrong one is it feels like a lot of shame for me, right? Like, it's just, you're not good enough, so I'm just going to cancel you. And I love this idea that, you can read both. Of course you should read both. And we will each get different things from everything we read. And because they're coming from different backgrounds, some of it's going to be familiar and maybe more comfortable to plot into the discomfort, and some of it may be more challenging, or it may be just more brutally honest and something that we need to see. And so I love that that there's this conversation that's happening right now, and I hope that it's going to increase demand for more children's books because it almost normalizes it earlier that these are voices, and these are voices of merit, that are just like you and me, but also very different from you and me. And that's important. Also, growing up in Miami, I always said, like, people, when Obama was elected, everybody was like, oh, it's post-race America. And I was like, that's nonsense. Like, first of all, it's offensive. Second of all, it's nonsense. And I feel like at North Miami Senior High, we all saw color. We talked about it. It was like right up in your face, and people called everybody everything under the sun. And it was bullied, and it was also celebrated. And it was there. That was my experience in school. And so I sort of feel like the world is kind of coming around to catch up, to have conversations that we like kind of just had, because it was such a giant melting pot. What was your experience in high school? Was it similar to that, or did it feel very much like you were on the outside?
Well, personally, as the text broke introvert, I was definitely had feelings of kind of being on the outside. That was just a me thing. As far as culture is concerned, I think that Miami is a diverse place, and our high school was a diverse place. but I still think that there were very segmented, silos, if you will, everybody operated in.
Yes.
And so, I mean, if there were conversations that were happening, they were probably happening within those silos.
Yes.
That was my experience.
Yes.
And so there was diversity, but there wasn't really a lot of inclusion.
Yes.
Not on a real deep basis. So that was my experience of it, which I only really recognize as an adult looking back. When I was a kid, it was what it was. That was, it's just how it was. But yeah, that was my experience. I think about high school. I think we went to a high school, and I don't know I think it was majority people of color.
Yes. Yes. I think it was 1/3 Black, 1/3 Latino, 1/3 white. But among the Latinos, you had the Venezuelans and the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans and the Colombians. I mean, like, it's like within each group, within the Blacks, there were Haitians, there were African Americans, there were Dominicans. I mean, within each group, there was everything. So you had the white kids who grew up in the rich neighborhoods on the water and the white kids who were on food stamps. I mean, you had everything. But you had, I think that there were a group of us that were in the honors class that we basically just like went from honors class to honors class.
Yes.
And even though that class even also was diverse, there was still that clique also. It was like the kids who were investing in, and then all the kids were just trying to keep out of jail. It's sort of how I felt like the school operated. And and it's funny because we had Black teachers, we had Latin teachers, we had tons of male teachers, and so I read a lot of stuff where people are like, all the teachers are white ladies, and I'm like, well, most of the teachers I remember weren't. I mean, there were some that were, obviously, but like the ones who kicked my ass a lot were definitely not those.
And I had similar observations. I remember we, like you said, that there's that AP honors track that we just kind of traveled around together. But my recollection was it was still like really mostly white, as opposed to being really very diverse.
Yes.
And what I was thinking about when I think about high school is that even though it was a majority, people of color in the student body, to me, it kind of still operated as a mostly white school. Like, for example, did you take the PSAT?
Yes.
I didn't know anything about a PSAT. I never knew, I don't even know if I ever spoke to a counselor.
They never called me
into, But my background, I didn't know anything about a PSAT. Nobody ever told me. And so, I feel like, and then it's good to know that you didn't learn that from the counselor.
Yeah. Well, but did you just but instead, like, there were two tests. There was the PSAT, and then there was like the ASVAB, or like something that basically told you like what career you should have.
Yeah, and I knew about that. Somebody told me about the ASVAB.
Well, that test told me I should be a fireman. So and
I should be an engineer or a construction worker. So,
so now we know those tests are nonsense. Yeah, I don't remember ever meeting with a counselor that told me what to do or what to think or what kind of path to form or any of that.
Well, thank you for sharing that with me, because I had this thing in my mind that all the white kids met with the counselor and they learned about the PSAT from her or him, and nobody ever told me. So I thank you for sharing that with me. But yeah, so that was my recollection of kind of how high school was, diverse, but not really very inclusive.
Well, yeah. And so, I mean, to layer onto that, I grew up in a family, we had means. I didn't have to talk to a counselor in high school, but my parents hired one outside. Yeah. So I probably learned about the PSAT from her. I learned about the SAT from her. I learned about test prep from her. I learned about college admissions and how to write essays from her. Right. So there you go. Right. Yeah. It definitely wasn't in the school. So I'm deeply involved in politics, and I feel like, I've told my children that they can be anything they want to be on earth as long as they're voters. Like, if they don't vote on the first Tuesday of every November, they can't come home for Thanksgiving. Right. Like that's just my rule. And I don't even mean like president. I mean like dog catcher.
Local,
They have to vote
absolutely.
for everything. And the primaries, I think in particular, are the most important elections, because the primaries are where you send a message to the parties about what candidates are viable, who you
Right.
want to see more of, what messages resonate, so that they can decide that those are the ones they're going to get behind, so that those candidates can raise money. And I feel like the whole idea about the brown bookshelf is exactly that. It's making sure that you're amplifying the voices of
Mhm.
authors that are writing books that we need to see more of, so that
Yes.
they're saying, oh, they're actually marketable, they're actually viable in a business sense. Because, you know,
That's
you see all the time businesses are like, yeah, diversity, equity, inclusion, it's really important, we should do it. But they do it because now they know it actually helps the bottom line, right? So like, sometimes you just got to talk to someone's pocketbook in order to make it work.
Yep.
So does that influence, like, how do you as an author, I don't know if there's a better word, I'm sure that there is, but how do you as an author sort of stay pure? How do you stay like writing the thing you want to write and not think, I know that this one will sell a lot? Because I right now I'm thinking about what the next book is after Limitless, and I know that there's an easy, marketable, sellable book, but that's the figurine
Mhm.
path for me, right? Like I
Mhm.
don't, I'm not going to enjoy it, but also I understand that like my bank doesn't take good karma in exchange for a mortgage. So how do you, I've really tried. How do you stay pure to the artistic voice inside of you that wants to write what you want to write?
I'm of a lot of minds on this. First, I would say, again, you can do both and. You
Mm,
can write the figurine book that will make you some money and that will allow you to go ahead and work on and produce the book of your heart. Um, I always go into writing a book that I think and hope is going to sell really well. I've come to recognize though that my voice is more literary than it is commercial.
mm,
And that's just who I am. And so I've learned to accept that. I still strive to kind of meet, that perfect sweet spot someday and just have that, gangbuster book, without giving up my literary sensibilities.
mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, my track record has shown me that the books that sell are the books that come from my heart.
Yes.
The ones that I try to write for the market, they just have always seemed to fall short. I think that as I continue to grow and learn, I am getting closer to learning how to reach that sweet spot. But if I have to choose, I'm going to choose writing the book of my heart every time.
Oh, I love that. I people have asked me, how I write, and the way that I describe it is that I feel like I sort of circle around an idea for a long time, and
Mhm.
it's almost like I'm circling the house. And from the kitchen window, you can see the you can see the refrigerator brand, and from the living room window, you can see what kinds of couch cushions there are, and from the bedroom window, you can see all sorts of stuff. But until you find the front door, you can't
Mhm.
go into the house. And for me, I like circle the house and I circle the house and I circle the house, like looking at every single little detail and turning it over in my mind. And then one day I just find the front door, and maybe I like wake up in the middle of the night with it, or maybe I like it's on a run or in the shower or something. And I'm like, oh, that's the hook. That's the story. That's the way I have to tell it. And then I run into the house and I'm like thing one and thing two and Dr. Seuss. And I like can just run all over the place because I know where all the toys are hidden. How do you know when a book, because, my books are 40, 60,000 words. I have tons of words to spare. I can write garbage for a chapter and like I've got plenty of space. Children's books, there are not a lot of extra words. Like all your words have to actually count. How do
Yes.
you know when it's ready to come out of you?
Well, I'm like you. I have a mulling process before I start writing. But for me, because there is such low word count, writing is like a puzzle for me.
Mm,
That's kind of my metaphor. And because I write in poetry a lot, or just very sparse, prose, every word does matter. So I just look at it as a puzzle, and I have lots of drafts, right?
Yes.
I write at first. I'm really bad about self-editing, and I'm trying to break that habit. People just get it on the page and you can fix it later, and which is true, but I'm still a self-editor. But just trying to figure out how, language is really important to me. Like you illuminated for me, it's because of the music, right?
Right.
The language, the rhythm, and all of that. And so as I'm working on the story and revising, that is what I'm focused on, in addition to, of course, characterization and plot and all those things. But the language, I think that's what makes a Tameka Fryer Brown book, is my focus on just the mellifluous, nature of the language and the lyricism and the, all of the literary devices that I try to include. So for me, it's like a puzzle. And until I can't, I can go back to books that I've published and still revise, quite frankly. I should have done this. I should have done that.
Man, your editor really does get in the way. If you're revising books you've already published. Oh my gosh. I think there might be a medication for that.
I don't want it. I got to keep it. But yeah. So,
but I think that idea of the constant, the perseveration, the constant perfecting. I asked people to give me 3, nouns to describe themselves, and then one of yours was like recovering perfectionist, and I think that. But I think that's what makes your books so good, is that you don't settle for mediocrity in them. You really do. You are the person who I know probably goes to the Google and is like, words that start, like nouns that start with a D, and you just start, or like verbs that start with a Z,
Laura,
or whatever it is. And you're I do that. So I'm like, I know that there's a better word and I can't quite find it. I know that it's in here somewhere, and I can't get it out of my brain. And then I just go and I look at lists of words all the time where I'm like, you could Google things like 3-syllable words that start, 3-syllable verbs that start with K, and like the lists of words come up, and it's and you see things like mellifluous, like a great word.
Yeah.
So is it difficult once you have the cadence, the but whatever, the way that the children's books go, do you find yourself thinking in that cadence all the time, or talking in that cadence? Like, does it just start becoming the way that your mind is working because you start seeing those patterns, those math and language and song patterns in everything that you're looking at? Or are you able to separate it to just the time when you sit at your desk and you write Kidlit?
For me, it's really just the time that I sit down and write Kidlit.
Amazing.
Yeah. I wish I could kind of carry some of that over to my everyday language. I would be such the public speaker, but no, for me, like Laura LGO.
Well, my kids laugh. They're like, we can tell you're going into speaker voice right now when you're telling us the story, Mom. Their eyes roll back in their head. But I think it's like, the manifesting, like as soon as you put your decision that you're going to do something, you start noticing it everywhere. And I just didn't know if, your brain, like they say people are fluent in a language when they start dreaming in that language. And I didn't know if you started thinking and speaking and sort of noticing in the cadence of whatever book you're working on at the time.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I bet there's some people out there that do that. But no, for me, it's just when I sit down and I start trying to puzzle everything together, that's when I'm focused. Yeah.
And does the book start with the story or the characters, or is it, do you like wake up in the middle of the night with like a beat in your head, or is it just different every time?
It's different every time.
Oh, how fun.
It's fun. The only thing is that I'm always kind of dependent on a muse. Not always, but a lot of times I'm dependent on that muse. And I'd much rather be the disciplined writer that just gets up 9 o'clock every morning and sits at the computer and like, okay, what masterpiece am I going to start on today? But the first book, it was exactly what you said. I woke up and with a cadence, and the rhythm, and kind of wrote that book, the first draft, which was a really good draft, in like a day. And so that was the first book. The second book, I came up with the idea from just being in a mood one day. And I said, oh my gosh, in a mood, that would make a good hook for a book.
Oh, yeah.
And so but that one took a little bit longer to kind of puzzle together. And then Brown Baby Lullaby. I don't know, you probably go through this as well. Now that my children are pretty much all grown, sometimes just the nostalgic feeling hits me. And I remember when they were babies, and I remember their little soft feet, and I remember how they used to smell after a bath. And so I was just having one of those moments, and I said, I need to write this down. I need to capture this sensibility in a book. And that's how Brown Baby Lullaby came about.
That is incredible. My children are 16 and 18, so they're now going to be sophomore and senior in high school, and I have this nostalgia feeling that I cannot for the life of me find a word for, and I think it's probably a word that exists in another language, and the closest I've come is saudade in Portuguese. Apologies to anybody who speaks Portuguese that I just totally massacred the pronunciation on that, but saudade, which is this idea that you have pre-nostalgia. Like I look at my kids now and they're so incredible, and I see these little glimpses of who they're going to be when they're adults, and I already miss them even though they're sitting in my living room. It's like I just, it's like this longing for the time that I have in my hands that I can feel sort of slipping through my fingers, even though it's right in my hands already. It is the strangest feeling. And I don't know what the name of it is, but or if there's been a children's book written about that feeling of like sort of pre-held loss. But I love this concept of nostalgia. I think it's incredible. Yeah. So we are at time. Somehow my technology didn't work and this didn't stream live to Facebook, but I'm going to put it up there later. So we didn't have questions from people, but when people do have questions and they want to find you and they want to buy your book, I know they go to TamekaFryerBrown.com. Where else can they find you? What else should they look into?
Okay, well, as far as my books, they're available anywhere books are sold. So you can go on my website, find out their titles, and buy them wherever you want to buy them. But my social media, I have a Facebook page, Tameka Fryer Brown, children's book author. My Twitter handle is at @TBrownKidlit. That's TEE Brown Kidlit. And my Instagram is at Tameka Fryer Brown.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So we'll put all of those in the notes. Thank you so much for spending your morning with me. This was educational and interesting. And I'm so excited for the next book coming out and also the big secret project that we don't know about. So I'm excited about both of those. And you're amazing. Go Pioneers.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I had fun. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.